Good evening and welcome to Q&A. Answering your questions tonight, the Federal Minister for Agriculture, Tony Burke, Mental Health Expert and Australian of the Year, Patrick McGorry, Rabbi Jackie Ninio of Sydney's Progressive Emmanuel Synagogue, the author of The God Delusion and the Greatest Show on Earth, evolutionary biologist and outspoken atheist Richard Dawkins, Family First Senator Stephen Fielding and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Julie Bishop. Please welcome our panel. And we're also sending our best wishes to Sister Veronica Brady, who was going to be part of tonight's panel but had to withdraw at the last minute due to ill health. Remember, Q&A is live from 9:35 Eastern Time. Join the Twitter conversation with your comments. If you have a question, send it by SMS to 1975522 or go to our website, abc.net.au/Q&A. Let's go straight to our very first question tonight. It comes from Arthur Lith.
The question for Richard Dawkins. Can one be a believer in God as well as a believer in the theory of evolution?
Richard, we'll start with you, obviously.
First, I want to say, why am I the only one who's outspoken?
You want to be.
Obviously, you can be a believer in God and in evolution because the Archbishop of Canterbury is, the Pope is, or at least the previous Pope was, and the present Pope kind of is almost there. So is any bishop, so is any archbishop, so is any cardinal, so is any priest worthy of the name. So that is absolutely clear. As an empirical fact, it is easy to be both. I find it slightly hard. I have a certain niggling sympathy for the creationists because I think, in a way, the writing is on the wall for the religious view that says it's fully compatible with evolution. I think there's a kind of incompatibility which the creationists see clearly, but the archbishops and the bishops, nevertheless, they've seen the evidence. Anybody who's seen the evidence knows that evolution is a fact, and so you can't get away from it. But I think the writing's on the wall.
Evidently 40% of Americans disagree with you and they can't reconcile their faith with the theory of evolution.
The figure varies between 40–45% and has done for about the last 30 years. It's an astonishing figure, and that appears to be true. Gallup polls seem to suggest that that is true. It's even worse than that because they actually believe that the world is less than 10,000 years old. And because since the true age of the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, that's a non-trivial error. I've previously compared it to believing that the width of North America is 8 yards.
Steve Fielding, can one be a believer in God as well as a believer in the theory of evolution?
Look, I'm not an expert on these issues whatsoever, and I think people in Australia have different beliefs, and their faith may drive them one way or the other. I actually believe in creationism. I think the Prime Minister does as well. So, look, I suppose at the end of the day, each person will come to their own conclusion on the issue, Tony.
You believe in creationism. So, because I've never heard you state this, but it's a fact, is that you believe in creationism, not evolution. Is that right?
That's correct. But, look, each person will come to their own conclusion,
well,
and, you know...
Richard, you'd like to respond?
Do you believe the world is less than 10,000 years old?
Look...
No, do you believe that?
Look, I think that there are a lot of questions in this area, and I think people will come to their own conclusion. I don't want to force people into one way or the other.
You're not being asked to force. You're not being asked to force.
New Earth creationist or an old Earth creationist?
Yes.
So, which is it, Steve?
You're a young Earth creationist who believes the world is less than 10,000 years old. You're a parliamentarian in Australia who believes the world you live in is less than 10,000 years old.
I didn't say that, by the way. You're saying that I said it was 10,000.
OK.
I didn't say that.
OK, no, you didn't say that.
Do you believe it?
No, so it is an open question, though.
Look,
is that what you actually believe?
Look, I think that the science today will discover more and more, but I think that most Australians come to a view they either believe that we evolved or we came from creation, and I think that you can believe whatever they like on that issue. I'm not trying to force that issue onto anyone, Tony.
So where did human beings come from?
Well, you may well ask this guy. He's got firm views on it from that perspective.
In your view, I'm just interested in that before we move on.
Well, as I said, I believe that people, you know, started from being created. But look, there are some other views out there about people evolving from other types of animals.
And as in apes, for example.
Well, look, that's what some believe that, yeah.
Jackie, let me bring you in here because we'll come back to that, Steve. Your view: can one believe in evolution and still reconcile faith in God?
Absolutely, and I think I'm in very good company, as it turns out, with many religious leaders who believe that the science is pretty clear that you know, we evolved, but I think that there are still many unanswered questions, and I think we go to a Big Bang or whatever theory we start with, and there's always questions that we don't have an answer to. And I think for me, I answer those questions with a divine being or a God. Others will answer it in a different way, but I don't think they're incompatible at all.
So your God is the person or the being which created the Big Bang that started the whole process and then stepped aside. Is that the way it is?
Yeah, in my mind, that God was involved somehow, somewhere. There was something before the Big Bang, and there are questions that we don't understand. There are still things we don't know, and for me, my faith and my belief tell me that that was the role of God, was involved there somewhere. But you know, I don't think that negates the science, and I don't think that the story that we have in the Bible in any way negates all that we know in science. I think it's human beings struggling to understand and to make sense of our worlds, and I think we can learn a lot from the creation story in the Bible, not necessarily about how the world was created, but good moral teachings and lessons about humanity and about the earth and the world and how we should treat each other and how we should treat the world.
Tony Burke. Go back to the original question: can one be a believer in God as well as a believer in the theory of evolution?
Oh, the simple answer to that is yes. I should add, I've spent my whole political career avoiding ever making a comment on religion, and you bring me here tonight.
Welcome to our panel.
I can't for the life of me see where there's a conflict there. I just can't.
Julie.
Evolution and faith can and do coexist, and I think many scientists and theologians are able to reconcile their belief in evolution and the scientific fact and theory, and also a belief in a higher being. And you know, I understand the evolution side of it, you know, amino acids to proteins to molecules to cells to organisms, and then to a creature that has the brain power to question its own origins, that is man. But as Pope Benedict did say, he said it's absurd to suggest that these should be presented as alternatives, that is, evolution or faith. And in fact, they can coexist. They don't have to exclude each other. And who answers the imponderable question, well, where did everything come from originally? I mean, where did the original amino acid come from? So I think there's room for both, and they have coexisted happily in Australia and will continue to do so.
OK, well, there's a question down the front. I'm going to come to you in a moment, but first of all, we've got a question that draws in Patrick McGorry, and I'm going to go to Dan Anderson first. There's Dan.
For Professor McGorry, in your experience, do you think that belief in a transcendent being or in the transcendent in general is part of normal, healthy human psychology, or is it a symptom of mental illness?
That's obviously a trick question, right?
Do your best, Philip.
Well, look, you know, I've looked after a lot of people over the last 20 or 30 years who have had very significant psychiatric disorders, and you know, it's quite common for religious themes to actually manifest within the context of their symptoms. So, you know, religion and mental health do coexist in that way. But clearly also spirituality is an important part of positive mental health. So I think there's two sides to this coin, and you know, I think the question, we could talk about that for hours, really.
Let's go back to Richard Dawkins. I mean, you refer to belief in God as the God delusion. I'm wondering whether you think that spirituality may have a positive psychological benefit, as the questioner implies.
No, I don't think it has a positive psychological benefit. As to whether religious belief is a mental illness, I don't think it's fair to call it a mental illness because so many people actually do it. On the other hand, I think we could say that if you met one person just one person who claimed to believe some of the things that religious people as a whole claim to believe, you would think they were suffering from mental illness. It's just because so many of them believe it that we treat it as normal. But if you actually met somebody who said he believed that water could turn into wine, a man could walk on water, that a man could raise somebody else from the dead, you'd say, well, put him away. But because so many people believe it, you take it seriously.
OK, I'm told we've got a question come in, a web question. It's from Cassandra Devine in Victoria. It's to Richard Dawkins. Why do you feel the need to express your views so stridently when they're not always welcome? Isn't it rather like going around to playgrounds and telling children that Santa Claus isn't real?
In modern English vocabulary, it's more or less impossible to use the word atheist without preceding it with the adjective strident. They simply go together. I am not strident. I'm no more strident than anybody else. Now, is it like disillusioning children about Santa Claus? The weird thing is that children manage to grow out of Santa Claus and suddenly...
Let's throw that to Jackie. And the questioner says that questioning faith might be a bad thing, might sort of cause people to stop believing in Santa Claus or whatever.
I think we have, as people of faith, we have an obligation to question and to continually be understanding and reinterpreting and trying to find meaning within our tradition. And I can say for myself that what I understand and believe about God now was not what I understood and believed about God when I was 10, and it's not what I understood when I was 5, and it won't be what I understand when I'm 90. I think that it's an evolving process to understand God and what God is and how God is in the world. And
Here's the interesting thing, you keep reinterpreting God as you get older by the sound of it. Do you ever consider that perhaps God doesn't exist?
No, I don't, but there are those who do. And I think, for me, my faith in God is quite strong, but I think for many, many believers, it's very... Of course, you question the existence of God, and that sometimes you may come to the position that God doesn't exist, and all kinds of things can happen in your life and in the world and the way you view things. And there's an amazing Jewish philosopher who said the second you start to define God, you already limit God. God is understandable in some ways by humanity, and so the second we try and grapple with it, we're already limiting what God is. So I think that there's an unfolding understanding of God as you change and as the world changes, and all we can do as human beings is to approach it from where we are and from our understanding and what we know in that moment.
Before we come to our questioner down the front who had his hand up, Richard, do you regard that as just clever sophistry?
I was wondering what on earth it meant, I must say.
I prefer clever sophistry myself.
OK, we did have a question down the front here, and I'm going to go to you. You had your hand up.
Yes, my question's for Professor Dawkins. Given that your previous role at Oxford University was about, propagating the knowledge of science to the public, which I think you've done excellently with, The Greatest Show on Earth, and also the BBC documentary that you did where you, expose the stupidity of homeopathy and so-called Eastern medicine. Don't you think it would have been prudent to stick on that sort of line as opposed to driving a wedge between religious people and science? I mean, in my opinion, what you've sort of done, probably inadvertently, is create a situation whereby people like Steve, who are actually in control of, whether our country has an emissions trading scheme, believing in climate change or not, have to question science over their faith. Wouldn't it be better to separate the two issues completely and just say, this is science, this is evidence, go out and make the best decisions that you can based on fact, and what you, believe in your own personal life should be completely separate?
It's a familiar line of argument, and I've met it often. I think that wasn't supposed to be put down. It's a genuinely difficult question. It's a question of political expediency. The implication of your question is that there's something about religion which is personal and which doesn't have any bearing, that evidence doesn't have any bearing upon it. Now, as a scientist, I care passionately about the truth. I think that the existence of a supreme being, a supernatural supreme being, is a scientific issue. Either there is a God or there isn't. Either there are gods or there are no gods. That is a...
But is that something really relevant for
Yes,
public
because it's a supremely important scientific question. If the universe was created by an intelligence, then we are looking at an entirely different kind of scientific theory if the universe came into existence by natural means. If God or gods had something to do with the creation of life, then we're looking at a totally different kind of biology. So I think you can't just say religion and science have nothing to do with each other. Science can get on, and you let people have their own religious. Of course, you let people believe whatever they like, but you cannot say that. That science and religion are completely separate, because religion makes scientific claims. It certainly makes scientific claims about miracles, as I mentioned before, and you cannot reconcile an authentic approach to science with a belief in miracles, or I suspect with a belief in supernatural creation. At least, the very least you should say is that this is a scientific question.
OK, I know, I'm sorry I'm going to interrupt you there because we've got lots of questions. You're watching Q&A. Remember, you can send us your web or video questions to our website. The address is on your screen. But our next question tonight comes from in the audience, and it's from Renee Brazier.
Professor Dawkins, you're clearly against the teaching of creationism in the context of the science classroom, but do you think there's any value in teaching religious studies in schools?
I won't start with you, if that's OK. I might go to Tony Burke, first of all, for an answer to that, and I'll come back to you.
I think on the teaching of religious studies, there's a significant role there for parents as to whether or not they want that to be one of the things that's taught to their children. I agree with the comment that religious teaching does not belong in the science room. I do agree with that. But I also think that there's significant issues for parents. Some parents want their children to have a religious education. Some want their children to have a religious education that exposes them to a whole range of different faith belief systems. And some don't want to go there at all. And I actually reckon that's personal enough for parents to have a significant say in that.
Let's go to Julie Bishop, because I want to hear, as I said, from the three politicians before we go to the rest of the panel.
Tony, you might recall there was a debate earlier this year when it was suggested that the Bible should be taught in schools, and there was quite a controversy about it. I happen to believe that the Bible is one of the all-time bestsellers. That's a fact, and it is the basis of so much Western morality and thought and history and law and Western culture and literature, and it doesn't have to be taught in religious classes. It could be taught academically along with...
What about in science classes?
Well, along with the works of Shakespeare and the Iliad. But no, I believe that intelligent design is not something that would be taught in a science class. I mean, science, as far as I'm concerned, is the search for the natural causes of the universe, and that's what science should be about. We don't have intelligent design classes as such in Australia, as far as I'm aware, in the curriculum, but I think that it should be open to parents and open to schools to choose to offer religious instruction if that's what the schools and the parents wish to have.
Steve Fielding, they don't have it in many schools, but they do have it in the school associated with your church, where they do teach creationism, Waverley College.
Look, different schools teach different things. There's Jewish schools, there's Christian schools, there's all sorts of schools. Look, I actually think religion and science are separate. I don't think they should be taught in science, no.
I noted that I looked at the website of Waverley College. It has a slogan that says, "All your children will be taught by the Lord." What does that mean exactly?
Look, it may be that you've read more than I have, Tony, but look, at the end of the day, look, for example, I mean, my faith is personal. I don't think I've ever really come out and spoken about it. It's the media that have quizzed me more on it than I've actually gone out and actually spoken on it. In actual fact, I first met the Prime Minister when I was first elected, and it's funny, you know, he sat there, pulled out his Bible out of his top pocket and started to lecture me and give me a sermon. And I thought, that's interesting. I've never done that to anyone. He's the Prime Minister. First meeting, never met the guy, pulls out his Bible. He's probably still got it in his top pocket, I think. But, look, it's not... I think it's very personal. And I think that, look, I've got my decision-making, my core decision-making team. I have a Jew and an atheist. I think you should be making policy on common sense and what is best for Australia. I don't think that, you know, Australians like the idea of having it driven by religion. And that is the truth, Tony. I've never raised the issue. It's very personal to me. I've never gone out and done what Kevin Rudd's done, meet someone for the first time, pull out the Bible and actually lecture them.
I'm going to interrupt you, because once again we've got a web question on this subject. It's from David in Victoria. Do you believe intelligent design should be part of the science curriculum taught alongside evolution, or do you believe it is non-scientific and should be relegated to the rubbish bin? And while you're talking, Stephen Fielding, we'll go to you first.
What was the question? Sorry, Tony, I missed it.
The question was about whether intelligent design should be taught in the science curriculum.
Look, I actually think that kids are pretty smart, and I actually think that there's room potentially to be actually taught both, and allow the kids work it out. You know, I mean, I think they're pretty smart.
In the science room.
Not in the science room. I said before, Tony. So in the science room, I've told you before, and I'll say it again: religion and science should be separated. I don't think there's room for that, and that's why I'm saying is that, you know, if parents are concerned, then maybe the school should teach both, but not in the science class, if you know what I mean. I think kids can work it out themselves with their parents themselves from there, but I don't think it should be in science at all. I make it quite clear: religion and science are two separate issues.
All right, Richard Dawkins, is that a compromise that you're comfortable with?
Well, I'd like to answer the previous question, which was, after all, put to me.
Yeah, of course you may.
Which was, do we think that religion should be taught in schools, not in science class? Of course it should not be taught in science class, but it certainly should be taught. Religion is a very important part of our culture. As Julie Bishop has said, it's a very important part of literature. She also said it's important for our morals. Like, goodness sake, I hope we don't get our morals from it.
No, I said it's a basis for Western morality and thought.
Well, I very much hope it is not the basis for Western morality. And
it has been.
It is the basis for a lot of Western literature, and for that reason it's very important to teach it. You can't understand European history without being steeped in religion, because so many of the wars were about it. But there's another very good reason for teaching religion, comparative religion, which is that children will then learn that there are lots of different religions, and they're all incompatible, and they can't all be right. And so what is I think actually rather wicked is taking children who are too young to know and teaching them, you belong to this religion. You belong to, you're a Catholic or you're a Muslim or whatever it might be. That, I think, is wicked. What you should say is, there are people called Catholics and they believe this, there are people called Protestants, there are people called Muslims who believe that, people called Jews who believe the other. That's important, that's worth teaching. Let children make up their minds when they're old enough. But don't tell children that they belong to this religion or that.
Jackie, let's hear from you, and bear in mind that I think you heard Julie Bishop, former Education Minister, suggest the teaching of the Bible in schools might be a good idea. I mean, I suppose it depends whether we're talking about Old Testament or New Testament, from your point of view.
Yeah, I think that there are many religious beliefs, and I think it's really important, maybe for some of the reasons that Richard suggested, to be able to let people know the beliefs of various religious communities. And I think that it's really important, in order to break down the misunderstanding and the prejudice and the division that happens between people, when instead of seeing actually the differences between religions, that teaching about them can actually find a lot of commonality as well, and a lot of places where we do agree and we do see things in the same way, but not just teaching religion. I think we should be teaching other moral basis of thought and other philosophy as well. And I think on the point of not telling your children what religion they are, I think we have an obligation as parents. We're raising our children, we're making decisions for them all the time, and I think this is...
Are you at all worried that in religious schools children get indoctrinated, which I think was one of the points Richard was making?
Well, I don't want to speak for all religious schools, but the ones I know, I don't feel they're indoctrinated. I think there's a very... Well, I don't know. The ones that I know, there's a very healthy spirit of questioning and a lot of opening for children to, to question what's going on and to question belief and to ask and to not necessarily follow their parents. And you're right, if they come to an age and a time when they decide that philosophy or that religion is not for them, then they're not going to remain part of it. But I think, as a parent, I would want to be giving my child a firm foundation in my beliefs.
All right, let's hear what Patrick thinks about this. Teaching religion in schools, you comfortable with it? Are there limits? Where do you set them?
I thought you were going to let me off the hook, Tony.
No, we want to explore who you are.
Yes, yeah. Well, look, I very much agree with what Jackie and Richard have been saying about the value of teaching comparative religion. I've seen that in my own children. They went to a nominally religious school. It was of one particular denomination, but it was extremely liberal, and they certainly didn't teach any religion in science classes. They taught it in a comparative religion way. My youngest son learned a lot about Islam through that process, and and really noticed the common features, actually, with other major religions. So I thought that was really valuable for him to do that. But I certainly don't think intelligent design should be taught anywhere, really.
OK, you're watching Q&A, the live and interactive forum where you get to ask the questions. Next question comes from in the audience. It's from Hamza Qureshi.
My question is for Professor Dawkins. Considering that atheism cannot possibly have any sense of absolute morality, would it not then be an irrational leap of faith, which atheists themselves so harshly condemn, for an atheist to decide between right and wrong?
Absolute morality, the absolute morality that a religious person might profess would include what? Stoning people for adultery, death for apostasy, punishment for breaking the Sabbath. These are all things which are religiously based absolute moralities. I don't think I want an absolute morality. I think I want a morality that is thought out, reasoned, argued, discussed, and based upon, I could almost say, intelligent design. Can we not design our society which has the sort of morality, the sort of society that we want to live in? If you actually look at the moralities that are accepted among modern people, among 21st century people, we don't believe in slavery anymore, we believe in equality of women, we believe in being gentle, we believe in being kind to animals. These are all things which are entirely recent. They have very little basis in biblical or Quranic scripture. They are things that have developed over historical time through a consensus of reasoning, sober discussion, argument, legal theory, political and moral philosophy. These do not come from religion. To the extent that you can find the good bits in religious scriptures, you have to cherry pick. You search your way through the Bible or the Quran and you find the occasional verse that is an acceptable profession of morality. And you say, look at that, that's religion. And you leave out all the horrible bits. And you say, oh, we don't believe that anymore, we've grown out of that. Well, of course we've grown out of it. We've grown out of it because of secular moral philosophy and rational discussion.
Tony Burke. The follow-up question, I suppose, is from where do you derive your sense of morality? Is it from the Bible, or is it from some sort of humanist principles?
OK, you've now got me where I didn't want to be. I guess for me, and Richard can say it's cherry-picking, the concept a couple of thousand years ago from a bloke who my faith follows that says even if someone's your enemy, you ought to love them. For me, that's a fundamental part of how people should interact with each other, ideally. Fundamental. And I reckon a lot builds from that. And some of the principles that build from that aren't that different from the best humanist principles that Richards want to cherry-pick. But I've got to say, if you want to look at the worst that people have done in history, you can find religious examples and you can find atheist examples. I don't think Mao Zedong's China during the Cultural Revolution as an atheist regime or Stalin's Russia are great examples of morality either. People have done some shocking things in human history, sometimes in the name of religion, sometimes in the name of whatever other division they could find. But to say that that's an argument against religion, I don't think matches the level of logic that Richard's demanding of everyone else.
Can I just interrupt you there, because I mean, what was raised by Tony Burke was obviously the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, which does provide a kind of moral template for a lot of people. I mean, turn the other cheek, love your enemy as yourself, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are those who are persecuted because they stand up for what's right, etc. The meek shall inherit the earth. Those are principles you could take as a humanist, as moral principles, are they not?
I'm delighted to cherry-pick those. Jesus said some wonderful things, and the Sermon on the Mount is terrific. Modern morality goes back to that and says, yes, that'll do, that's very good. The Mao Zedong point, of course, is ridiculous.
Every religious war's not. Come on.
No. The difference is this. We are not counting up the number of good things and bad things that have been done by people who happen to be religious or who happen to be atheist. We're looking at whether there are religious or atheistic motives for doing good or bad things. Is there a logical pathway that leads from religious faith to doing bad things? Sure as hell there is. Is there a logical pathway that leads from atheism to doing bad things? No, you cannot make a logical pathway that way. Nobody would ever say, because I'm an atheist, I'm going to kill somebody. You could very well say, because I am a Christian, I'm going to go and kill Muslims. Because I'm a Muslim, I'm going to go and kill Christians. This is something that's happened throughout history. Nobody has ever said, because I'm an atheist, I'm going to go and kill somebody.
OK, we've got a questioner down the front here. And just wait a moment, we'll come to you straight away.
Professor Dawkins, thanks for your presence here. I think there's a very obvious flaw in the logic that you've used there. You seem to conveniently forget that many of the wars that have been fought in recent years, and indeed the most controversial ones, they have been this direct result of the desire to spread these values of capitalism, these values of democracy, which essentially are exactly what you are against in one way, shape or form. So whether it's spreading democracy or spreading capitalism or any of these ways of life, or a few decades before spreading communism or whatever, it has to be faced up to that these ideologies were what people used to advance wars, to advance persecution and oppression. So how can you possibly say that it's only in the name of religion that these sorts of acts have been done when clearly the reality is the exact opposite?
I never said that. There are plenty of other ideologies. Ideology is what motivates people to do these things, not atheism. Communism could well motivate. Nazism motivated people to do these terrible things. These are things that people believe as a matter of faith, not religious faith in that case, but faith, whereas atheism is not that.
OK, I'm going to go now to another question from the audience. It's from Andrew Collington.
My question's to Senator Fielding. You're courageously open about your religious and moral beliefs. As a believer in God, do you accept the Bible as the Word of God, and those who participate in homosexual behaviour ought to be shunned or put to death as the Bible demands? Or do so-called moderate Christians simply choose to ignore the Word of God in this case, picking what passages they feel best suits social trends of the day?
Look, I'm certainly not fearful of gays. As someone said just the other night, I think, on 60 Minutes. But look, I don't think gays should be shunned or put to death. That's just a joke. That is just absolutely insulting. It's actually, I find it, really offensive for that to even be thought of. But I'm just saying, I find that not you yourself, but just the question.
Those penalties are actually cited in the Bible. I think that's the point he was making.
Look, I actually don't believe in that at all. So that gives you.
Well, why not? I mean, it's the Bible. How do you decide?
Senator,
do
you find God offensive?
The Bible is a text some 2,000 years old. You've got the Old Testament, which, the stories in the Old Testament are fascinating, they're intriguing. The New Testament tells the story of a man who tried to do good things and who began this movement, Christianity, that is still with us today. He must have been an outstanding person, let's face it. But the beauty of the Psalms, the message behind the parables, doesn't mean that you have to be absolutely wedded to each word. It means that there were messages there that lived through the ages. And I don't have any difficulty with the New Testament at all in that regard. But it doesn't mean that I live my life according to every single chapter of the New Testament.
Let's hear a brief response from Richard Dawkins.
The New Testament. You believe, if you believe in the New Testament, that God, the all-powerful creator of the universe, couldn't think of a better way to forgive humanity's sins than to have himself put on earth, tortured and executed in atonement for the sins of humanity. What kind of a horrible, depraved notion is that?
Can I just say one thing? You know what disturbs me about this debate, and that is that people should respect other people's views. Now, the neo-creationists say that there's no scientific theory or fact, and they deny it. And the neo-Darwinists deny that there's faith or religion. Let's show some respect for different people's views, and then I think the debate will be perhaps much more pleasant.
What is wrong? When you say you're implying I didn't show respect.
No, I'm saying that what disturbs me about this debate, and we see it often, is that there are extremes. And whenever I see extremes, I'm concerned.
But the extreme is in the New Testament. I simply told you what is New Testament doctrine. That is St. Paul's view, which is accepted by Christianity. That's why Christ came to earth, in order to atone for humanity's sins. If it's extreme, it's not me that's being extreme, it's the New Testament that's being extreme.
Well, I'm going to jump in here, because is that not a story of sacrifice and therefore something admirable, has something admirable attached to it, which is the opposite of what you suggested?
Do you think it's admirable? Yes. Yeah. You think it's admirable that God actually had himself tortured for the sins of humanity?
That is the Christian view, obviously.
That is the Christian view. If you think that's admirable, you can keep it.
OK. Tony Burke, first of all, quickly.
I don't think your ridicule of people's faith is much better than what you're criticising. I really don't.
But I just stated it. I didn't
No,
ridicule
no,
it.
sorry. So if you go back over the words you used, once you stated it, you did then ridicule it. You did. And if you want to look at the challenges and the conflicts and making a community around the world work together, then the level of respect that so many religions have not shown for each other absolutely needs to be lifted. And your level of respect and tolerance could probably be a bit better too.
Let me answer that. I did no more than state the Christian doctrine, and Tony then said, that is the Christian doctrine, isn't it admirable? People said, yes, it's admirable. So how is it disrespectful if I simply state what it is and half the audience think it's admirable? What's disrespectful about stating it?
Press rewind, hear your own words. You have changed them.
OK, I'm sorry. I'm going to bring in our other panellists quickly to respond to this, and we'll start with Patrick. Your thoughts?
Well, I find the whole discussion a bit frustrating, I've got to say, because I'm immersed in the real world. This is very intellectual stuff, you know. I'm thinking about the people that are being tortured these days, you know, and, you know, what's happening to them. So I think... And it's on a whole lot of different bases. I would say ideology rather than faith is the driver of it. When you could say faith is a kind of ideology, as Richard probably agree with that. That's the problem. And we've got, you know, millions of people around the world that are still suffering these days. Slavery only went out about 100 years ago. We've still got torture. All of these social evils are still with us. So what are we doing about it? I'd like to talk about more practical things. That's my tendency.
OK, we've got a lot of people with their hands up. We do have a question which relates to one of your practical interests, and it comes from Dennis Colombo. Question 9. Where's Dennis?
It's a different kind of question, Tony. My question is, both political parties, the Coalition and Labour, have been severely criticised about their handling of the boat people, asylum seekers. I'm wondering if the non-politicians in the audience have got some insights into how they think we should go about it and perhaps lead us in a fresher direction.
Patrick, let's start with you on this.
Well, this is a subject very close to my heart. I've worked with asylum seekers and refugees since the late 80s.
And you've been scathing about immigration detention practices.
I think I've seen the situation deteriorate in Australia since that time. At that point in the 1980s, we had a very, very positive international reputation for looking after refugees and dealing with them in a very humanitarian way. And the whole situation deteriorated quite significantly in the last 20 years. We're starting to dig ourselves out of that hole now, and I am worried that we're, in the context of the political debate, we might be going to do a U-turn backwards again. So I am concerned about that, particularly from the mental health point of view, because the two things we know about the people that are coming to Australia and seeking asylum are 90% of them are genuine refugees, and 50 to 60% of them have been through very extreme experiences. They're not only the most courageous people, but they're also extremely vulnerable and traumatised. So we've got to, the one thing we have to do as a country is not add insult to injury and make that worse. And there are two things that do that. Prolonged, uncertain detention, and I'm not saying mandatory detention isn't necessary for certain purposes. Brief detention is quite warranted for health and safety checks. And the second thing, and this is the thing I had most clinical experience with, was the effect of temporary protection visas on people. That was just an absolutely devastating experience.
Well, let me
people.
ask you this, because the question that's being raised now is whether this government has actually shifted the problem offshore, effectively outsourced it, so that the same people who were put in detention in Australia are now largely being kept in detention, funded by Australia and in detention centres built by Australian dollars in Indonesia.
Well, I'm just going to stick with the health focus here. The key thing is to make sure that mental health and health facilities are available to them. That's the key issue with the offshore issue. Do they have access to proper mental health care and other types of health care in the locations they're being detained?
Do you fear that they may not?
I'm not sure about that. I think there are processes to try to ensure that happens, but I haven't been to the offshore detention centres, so I can't answer it definitely.
OK, let's go to Julie Bishop on this. There's been a fair bit of talk about this recently. In fact, the opposition has pretty much accused the government of shifting the focus of this detention of asylum seekers back to Indonesia and putting the problem in their lap.
Well, our concern is that the government weakened the border protection laws and has essentially said to Indonesia, this is now your responsibility to sort it out. The Prime Minister actually rang President Yudhoyono and asked him to intercept a boat that was heading to Australia and asked him to intervene and take it to Indonesia's shores, and then essentially said to Indonesia, it's your problem. Same with the Oceanic Viking. There is nothing humane about a policy that encourages people to go to people smugglers, puts them aboard leaky boats and sends them across the seas. We know that there are 105 Afghanis who were on a boat last November coming down from the north and haven't been seen since. We don't know how many other situations there are like that. So there's nothing humane about the people smuggling trade. What we need to do is ensure that Australia meets its obligations to be a good humanitarian country, and we do take our share of humanitarian refugees under an organised program, but we must also ensure that the integrity of our borders is such that we don't have people arriving by boat in circumstances which causes death and injury.
Very briefly, the logic of that would be to keep them in the detention centres in Indonesia, which have been outsourced and built by the Australian government.
Well, working with the transit countries and working with the source countries to ensure that they don't get into the hands of the people smugglers.
Tony Burke.
I think the point that we need to discourage seriously people smuggling is inarguable. There's no argument against that. You have a situation, and Julie's referred to the more recent example. I remember all the discussion following Civex. People drown on the way here, and that's not the way we want people to get here. It's also the case that the solution is not, once people get here, to treat them pretty cruelly and say, oh, there you go, we found a deterrent. And under temporary protection visas, what we said to people was, well, Australia said to people was, even if you're found to be here genuinely, even if you have ticked every box in being a true refugee, we're not going to give you any certainty, possibly ever. And that brought down mental health consequences which weren't in their interests, weren't in Australia's interests, and I really hope the opposition's not serious about wanting to bring them back.
Can I just ask you this, though? How do you know the same things aren't happening in detention centres in Indonesia where you have no control but simply provide funding?
What they are there in place of is the camps, which, in terms of living conditions, the camps that people have been waiting on, whether it be Lombok or elsewhere, have not been good situations. The fact that Australia is helping Indonesia with the people who are there is a better situation than what was happening prior to our assistance.
Let's hear from Jackie Nino. I mean, interesting question for you, I think, because are there parallels here with the 1930s and what happened to Jewish people who desperately tried to find third countries to take them, and it wouldn't. They simply weren't allowed in any of these places. They were kept in camps. Sometimes they just couldn't get anywhere. They couldn't find a port that would take them.
Absolutely, and I think the telling thing is that, you know, the statistic that 90% of the people who are coming are genuine refugees. There are people escaping and fleeing the most horrendous situations, and we are so blessed and so lucky to be here. And I understand also the need for health checks and for security checks, but really it needs to be done in the most humane way possible for these people who've been through so much already, just to give them a home and a place. And we have enough space, we have enough room, and they're each human beings, and I think that we need to be reaching out to them and to bring them in the best possible way that we can.
Steve Fielding, let's hear from you. I mean, Family First, well, I can remember when you first came to Parliament, Family First had quite a strong position that people were being poorly treated in detention centres. That seems to have evolved, if I may say that.
Yeah, look, it certainly has. And look, Family First realises that our vote is going to be crucial on this issue because it is going to come up in Parliament, I think, probably before the election. I went to Christmas Island this year. The Rudd government was able to get me there, which was good. And I spoke to some of the boat people, or asylum seekers, fresh off one of the boats. I asked them, did you pay any money? And this is not the driving force here. And they said, yes, about $8,000 and another 20 on the way. Now, I said, well, how many actually make it to Australia? And out of 100, about 20 get through. And I thought, blimey, that's a lot of people that people smugglers are playing on people's minds. Some get detained and some are actually killed along the way and some actually die along the way that nobody hears about. Now, this is a real issue. I voted, my record on this is pretty strong, I voted against some of the Howard government changes. I look at this issue seriously. I voted against some of the Howard government issues. My vote was crucial. He withdrew the bill from Parliament, wouldn't even have the guts to bring it into Parliament because I said I wasn't going to vote for it. Now, many people may not know that. Then when the Rudd government got elected, the Rudd government made some changes which I thought were a good move, more humane. I backed those changes. My vote was again crucial on those issues. Now, what I didn't expect was thousands of people to start arriving in Australia. We have a problem, OK? Now, before we start overreacting and saying, what are we going to do, you have to admit we have a problem. First of all, every person that Australia takes that comes through an unauthorised way, we take one less from the front of the queue. These people are waiting. Hold on a second here. When you say there's no queue, there's people waiting for years, for absolute years, and everyone we take by boat, we take one less. And secondly, we are making it even easier for the boat people. Now, I'm proud as an Australian that we should treat people humanely, but I didn't expect the problems of thousands of people coming and actual boats. So we do have to admit that we've got to address this issue. How we need to address it, we have to have a fair income debate without all the decisiveness about it.
All right, I just want to hear from Richard Dawkins. The same debate, essentially, has been going on in the UK, in fact, right across Europe. Your thoughts on hearing it repeated here?
I've been rather moved to hear the very humane statements that have been made. I don't feel I should contribute to this debate. I know nothing about the Australian situation, but I was moved especially by what the rabbi was saying.
OK, and Patrick McGorry, finally to you. I mean, you seem to be reflecting on the way that the conversation is going. I'm just interested on your thoughts.
I think a number of points have come out. Look, it's an upstream problem. You know, it's a massive worldwide problem. When Senator Fielding says, you know, there are large numbers coming, actually in world terms, there are a couple of thousand on Christmas Island. It seems like a lot because there's been an increase. But if you look at it in world terms, Australia itself takes 130,000 people plus into the country every single year. So it hasn't been looked at in a logical way, this issue, because it's been politicised for the last 15 years or so. I just don't think the media, the politicians, the community have really had a logical look at this issue.
I want to just complete this by going back to Julie Bishop. Do you take the view that the Navy should basically tow the boats back to Indonesia?
Well, that was Kevin Rudd's view before the last election.
Is it your view now?
I'm just saying it was Kevin Rudd's view before the election that they should take the boats back.
Please, is it your view?
Thank you. My view is that we should be working with the source countries, the transit countries, to do what we can to stop the boats coming. Now, if Because it is inhumane to put people on boats where they have a very high risk of drowning. And we've seen it already with 105 people left the northern shores of Indonesia and Malaysia. They haven't arrived, haven't been seen since last November.
So,
now, that is
briefly,
inhumane.
should the boats be stopped and towed back to Indonesia? That was the question, and I'm just wondering whether you actually have a position on that.
Well, obviously, in some circumstances that might be possible. In other circumstances, it won't be possible. So you'd obviously look at each...
So if you find a boat at sea full of people, are you saying, because that's when it's possible,
it would depend...
are you saying that it should be then towed back if it's seaworthy?
Well, it would depend on the circumstances. Kevin Rudd rang President Yudhoyono and asked him to send the Indonesian Navy down to collect them and take them into Indonesia. So it depends very much on the circumstances. But my point is, first you must work with the source and transit countries to make sure that we can get rid of this people smuggling trade and process refugees in a much more humane way.
Tony Burke.
The one thing that hasn't been mentioned at all is that people are also fleeing countries. Part of the motivation right at the beginning is someone has a well-founded fear of persecution. And there is no doubt that the situation in Africa, while still intense, is less intense in some parts than it was a few years ago. The number of people leaving Africa has gone down. Similar in parts of the Middle East. And in Sri Lanka, the number of people leaving or who had partially escaped and were waiting has gone up a lot. Now, that puts extra pressure on our region. And I know the opposition don't like talking about the so-called push factors, but the truth is we have a big change. We have a big change in the region, and when you're talking about 90% of people having a well-founded fear of persecution, you need a smart solution, a responsible solution, but it can't be based on a level of cruelty to their mental health once they arrive.
OK, we're talking about once they arrive. What Julie Bishop said earlier was it was the Prime Minister's position prior to the election that boats be towed back to Indonesia. You didn't deny that? That's true, is it?
Yeah, there are times when you can, and there's limits under the international law of the sea when you can. And one of the ways that does effectively have a dent on the people smuggling trade is if a whole lot of people have paid money to the people smuggler and then they arrive back in port. Now, you can achieve that very rarely, because frequently the moment the boat's sighted, it starts to sink.
But the towing back option is still an option, a live option for this government, is that right, from what you're saying?
The theory of it, as what was put by Kevin at the time, is something that has been very rarely possible. There's been times when it's been attempted, but I'm not going to pretend that we're able to do it on every occasion, because what do you then do?
But you would do it, but here's the point, you would do it.
No, I've said that, Tony.
When you could, you would do it.
The answer to that's yes. It's limited by international law of the sea, and it's also limited by what do you do the moment that boat starts to sink.
All right, I'm sorry, we're running. I know there's people with their hands up. We're running out of time. We've got time for just one more quick question. It is a web question from Patrick O'Shea in Queensland. Do you wish for, or indeed hope for, an afterlife? So this takes us back to religion and... let's start with Julie Bishop. Do you wish for or hope for an afterlife?
Well, I hope this is not it. I mean, is this it?
There is life after Q&A.
Well, I'm told there's life after politics. So, yeah, obviously that's part of my faith. I hope that there's something beyond what we have on earth. I don't know. I don't think about death that often, actually. And so it's part of... My hope that there is something more, but I haven't, formed that in any sense that, I'm going to be up there with angels and that sort of thing. I don't mean that, but I just think that we have this being, humankind. I believe we have a soul, and I would hope that the soul lives on.
Patrick McGorry, do you wish for or hope for an afterlife?
Yeah, I probably agree with Julie. That's my general feeling. I'd like to think that, I think about my family and I think about my parents, and yeah, I'd like to think that.
Jackie?
I think there's more to us than this body. I think we are an essence or a soul and a spirit, and I don't think that when our body dies, that dies as well. What it is, we'll never know, and well, we will know hopefully at some point, but I don't know now. And I think my religion teaches me to live the best possible life that I can here and now, and to do the best I can in the world, and not to focus too much on what comes next, just to do the best I can now.
Very brief answer, Tony Burke.
I reckon it's true, and I reckon Richard's going to love it.
Richard.
Let's be realistic about this. We have brains. It's brains that do the thinking. Our brains are going to decay. That'll be that. But when you say, is this it? How much more do you want? I mean, this is wonderful.
Well, at least another 5 minutes. So you don't wish for an afterlife?
Wouldn't it be incredibly tedious after the first 1,000 years or so?